By the 1870s, the European industrial population was beginning to question traditional authority. The brutal conditions faced by the poverty-stricken workers provoked many critics of the Industrial Revolution to suggest a system of government in which there would be an equal distribution of wealth in society. Thus, by the mid-18th century, Marxism was developed, and socialism gained increasing popular support from the urban working class. The system of laissez-faire capitalism employed in the factory systems during the Industrial Revolution brought about an extreme form of social inequality. Had European society instead chosen to utilize a utopian socialistic form of government, then the previous condition of social condemnation, which had artificially created hell within the Industrial Revolution, would have disappeared.
The mid-1800s brought a drastic change in political thought. Entrepreneurs of the revolution would experiment with different machines, causing many new scientific machines to take form and develop. This supports positivism. They believed that only scientific method could explain the events of society. The majority of entrepreneurs were supporters of laissez-faire capitalism, people who believed that the government should stay out of business affairs. The idea of laissez-faire had been present in society when Adam Smith, also known as the father of modern economics, wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776, a book that enhanced the capitalist idea of laissez-faire by saying the invisible hand of naturally arising competition would monitor and regulate individual entrepreneurs far more effectively than governmental restrictions would. Although competitive businesses kept each other in check from gaining too much power, they could still take over smaller businesses and farms to use to their advantage. After the installation of laissez-faire and government prosperity increased, the society became filled with conflicts. The crime rate rose along with people's discontent. Disease and infections spread as people's hygiene declined, and discontentment of the lower classes was caused by the new scientific methods that were invented by the wealthy entrepreneurs that conquered the tenant farmers. Positivism proves to explain the negative events that occurred in the lower classes of society.
In the early 19th century, the working class suffered because of brutal conditions in the factories, which gave rise to an augmentation in social inequality and tension. The development of capitalism allowed entrepreneurs to invest more in mass production, shifting rural labor into urban employment in factories. The capitalist system took advantage of the working class's labor because it allowed the business owners to extract money from the workers' wages and obtain profit from the products manufactured. This idea of the business owners, or the bourgeoisie, withdrawing a surplus value was stressed in Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto. Factories were cold and damp, and chemicals and toxic air infected workers, making them sick with chronic illnesses and women infertile. The wages of factory workers were relatively low, making the cycle of poverty continuous. Because cheaper labor was more in demand, many children as young as 6 were subjected to labor in factories, but their wages were a fraction of an adult factory worker. Although business owners' profits increased and industrialization further developed, the reward for labor did not. This inequality, in conjunction with the harsh conditions, sparked tension between the workers and entrepreneurs. Anger and frustration from factory employees intensified, causing revolts in labor unions that participated in strikes and spoke for better factory conditions and benefits. As stated in a 1910 newspaper article titled "The Only Hope of the Working Class," a labor union is essentially an army of occupation, a machine devised to force concessions from the employing class. Exploitation of factories and workforce was caused by an imbalanced capitalist economy that deprived factory workers from benefits, which could have been prevented if a utopian socialistic society had been in place.
Utopian socialism would have better suited the economy of the Industrial Revolution than laissez-faire capitalism. The mistreatment of the working class previously mentioned led socialists to strive towards a society free from industrial capitalism through the establishment of self-sustaining communities that would work cooperatively. One of the founders of this idea, Karl Marx, saw wealthy entrepreneurs and businesses growing more monopolistic while workers became more impoverished. He also states in the Communist Manifesto that people should cooperate to achieve success, and government ownership of the economy will end hunger, poverty, and slave-like working conditions, in reference to the brutal treatment of the poor in factories. A utopian society in which all are equal and the government handles everything would quickly resolve all issues created by capitalism and laissez-faire, as the poor would no longer be subject to the manipulation of the wealthy. Robert Owen, an English cotton manufacturer, testified against child labor and for inspection of working conditions by the government, displeasing many industrialists and helping prompt long overdue reforms. Workers themselves began rebelling against the harsh institutions of capitalism by frequently changing jobs, doing poor work when left unsupervised, and eventually banding together into mass movements, forcing political leaders to look into industrial abuse. The British Parliament began investigating factory and mine conditions, and the Factory Act of 1833 disallowed children under the age of 9 from working in textile mills, while also limiting working hours of older children. The Mines Act of 1842 prohibited boys younger than 10 and women from working underground. By moving farther away from the cruel and unequal system of capitalism and laissez-faire, society was able to gradually become more utopian and thus provide more fair and equal treatment for all.
The Industrial Revolution dramatically changed the way people perceived everything politically and economically. The development of laissez-faire capitalism led to social tension and inequality between the entrepreneurs and the poor. The middle to lower classes toiled through brutal working conditions and were subjected to wealthy landowners and businessmen. In this time period of inequality, utopian socialism would have better allowed Europe to transform into a society of opportunity and equality. Capitalism threatened to destroy the social order in Europe, but under the influence of utopian socialism, mass movements of the working class and gradual reforms managed to save society from social Armageddon.